Hello everybody, thank you for coming today. This is our first, what I hope will be a series of chats on environmental subjects. My name is Van Burbach. I am a professional environmental geologist, and I've also worked in geophysics, and I've worked in a lot of different aspects of the environmental industry. Today we're going to be talking about a subject that is particularly important to me, and that is landfills. Landfills, for the last about 12 years, I've been specializing in landfill work. Everything from trying to ensure that new landfills are built properly and as safely as possible, to trying to clean up the messes from old landfills that have created some significant environmental problems. So I guess we can get right into this. This is, because I'm going to start over here. Okay, this is something the U.S. EPA put out that I really like. It's called the life cycle of stuff. Okay, and it just kind of illustrates it too. We have so much stuff that we deal with in our society, and this is just kind of starts off with existing materials. That is, how do you get the materials that go into our stuff? It might be mining for minerals and for metals and things like that, or exploration for petroleum products to be made into plastics. It might be farming to get organic, things that we're going to put into products. And so there's a lot of different ways. That's how we get our original materials. And then there's the manufacturing process, of course. And then once all those raw materials are made into stuff, we have the distribution. They have to get out to our stores and into our homes somehow or another. And then we have usage. We use the products in one way or another in our homes or in our businesses or in our everyday life. And then the end of it is the end of life cycle. What do we do with this stuff when we're all done with it? And that's really what we're going to be talking about today. I think this is important, though, because at every stage in this process, there are significant environmental impacts. It takes energy. There's energy usage. There are greenhouse gases that are being produced by the processes. There is waste that's being produced by the various, at every stage in this cycle. And so these are all things, I think, that contribute to the environmental impact of all of the stuff we have in our lives. So I think that the biggest probable takeaway, that I would like for you all to have from this talk is, that we, the consumers, play a huge role in dealing with this problem. And really, the mantra of trying to deal with solid waste is, reduce, reuse, recycle, right? The reduce is a huge part. The reduce addresses every one of these. The less stuff we use, the less stuff has to be manufactured, the less stuff has to be transported, the less raw materials have to be pulled out of the earth. And it really has a bigger impact than just simply, I use less stuff. And then, of course, once we have the stuff, though, the question is, what are we going to do with it when we're done with it? And of course, this is the EPA's, it says from the most preferred to the least preferred. The most preferred, of course, is to reuse the products. There are a lot of things that, if you get, anything, glass jars, that something comes in from the grocery store, you can wash it out and use it as a storage container in your home instead of throwing it in the trash. Just little things like that. Anything that we can reuse instead of throwing away is going to contribute to solving our waste issue. And then, of course, if we can't reuse it, we want to see if we can recycle it, or compost it. You know, something that deals with it in a way other than putting it into the landfill. Then there's energy recovery systems. You know, if we're going to have to destroy it, you know, some of these things can be converted directly into energy, either through burning and running a generator off of the heat produced, or you know, through gasification of some materials can be actually turned directly into you know, gases that can then be burned and used to create energy. So that's a great thing to do. Of course, the least you know, the least preferred method to get rid of this stuff is finally we're just going to put it in a landfill. Now, you know, if we come to that point where we've got stuff that we can't reuse, we can't recycle, and maybe we can't, or there's the facilities available to convert it into energy in some way, then landfilling really is the only good option we have. We can burn the stuff, incinerators, but that creates a great deal of air pollution and a lot of, you know, then we have to deal with the ash and the waste from that, and that's really not, you know, particularly for large volumes of for a lot of the kinds of trash that we produce, that's not a really environmentally sound option. So really, landfills are, you know, when we get to the end and we can't do anything else with it, we kind of left with landfills as the only real viable option. So really, you know, particularly, you know, a modern landfill really is, you know, a relatively safe way to deal with most of these wastes. And of course, in the old days, you know, back in the 60s and 70s and even before that, of course, landfills were not regulated. Most landfills were simply, you know, they either dig a hole in the ground, they just put the trash in it, and then pile dirt back on top of it when they're done. Some of them were even built in, you know, creek valleys and valleys. They just, instead of digging a hole, well, we already got a valley here, let's just fill in the valley with trash. You know, and there are a lot of, you know, I've dealt with a lot of landfills, old landfills, that have created some significant environmental problems, groundwater contamination, as well as surface water contamination, and, you know, of course, atmospheric contamination. So that's a really, you know, I'm going to talk about those in a little bit. What are the major health concerns related to a landfill? Before I get into that, though, I just want to talk a few minutes about how a modern landfill is built, because, you know, now, you know, starting in the 80s, you know, we have you know, the federal code of, you know, regulations, Title 40, which addresses, you know, dealing with solid waste, and, you know, it specifies very strict standards for how landfills should be built. So a modern landfill is built, you know, typically they're excavated down to some level. There are separation requirements, and these vary from state to state exactly how these are implemented. Here in North Carolina, the bottom of the landfill has got to be at least 4 feet above the highest, long-term highest groundwater level that we could predict for the site. So there's got to be a separation, you know, it can't be excavated all the way down to where groundwater is. And then, you know, we have a complicated liner system. Typically the liner, one of these landfills, the first layer is, you know, 2 feet or more of compacted clay, which is very impermeable. It is required to have a permeability of less than 10 to the negative 5th centimeters per second. So that means, you know, that's just a very low level of permeability. Water won't go through it very quickly at all. So it starts off with a compacted clay layer. And then on top of that is a very heavy, usually a 60 mil thick plastic liner. You know, and that's a pretty thick. I mean, the liners, you know, we're talking about probably about the thickness of this board is the thickness of the actual, you know, the actual plastic liner that goes in, and all the seams are welded, so there are no leaks. There's no place where anything, you know, theoretically at least, could get out. So the entire bottom of the landfill is lined with plastic on top of the clay. And then you have a kind of a drainage layer of gravel that, you know, where all the fluids and waters and any liquids that are in the landfill are going to sink down, and they're going to accumulate in these layers, and they have pipes in there. And usually they're designed with sumps, so everything will flow to a low spot and it'll all be pumped out. So all of the fluids that are in the landfill are eventually pumped out of the landfill so they don't accumulate. Now, this is really important. You know, we call this leachate primarily. That's a combination of the fluids that are originally in the waste. You know, if we put in, you know, if we throw away liquid components in our waste, it's going to go into that stuff. But the majority of those fluids are really rainwater, you know, particularly when the landfill is opened and rainwater comes in and it percolates through the waste and leaches out all sorts of chemicals and things from the waste into the water, and then that water accumulates in the bottom of the landfill. So that's what we call leachate. And that leachate is pumped out, and it is for most landfills, that leachate is either, you know, if there is, sometimes they discharge directly to the sanitary sewer system, so they go straight to the wastewater treatment plant. A lot of them, they're held on site in a big tank or in a pond, you know, and then they're pumped out periodically, and they're just truckloads that are hauled off to the wastewater treatment system. In some cases, for larger landfills, some actually have an on-site treatment, you know, wastewater treatment system that treats the leachate. But most landfills take it to the local municipal wastewater treatment plant. And I think that's important for us to realize, because, you know, whereas the danger of all those chemicals that are in the landfill, you know, getting into the groundwater, into the environment, is greatly reduced by pulling all those fluids out and shipping them off to the wastewater treatment plant. But that's going right back into our drinking water.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of chemicals that, you know, can be in this waste that are not easily removed by the wastewater treatment plant.
Yeah.
You know, now a lot of the chemicals are. You know, our wastewater treatment plants are very effective at removing biological components. They're very effective at removing things like volatile organic constituents and things like that. But, you know, there are some things that are not removed by the wastewater treatment plant very readily. Particularly things like some pharmaceuticals, some pesticides and herbicides are very hard to remove from the groundwater. And there's some other chemicals that are difficult to remove. And so this is, you know, the fate of this leachate is really important, and that's one of the major concerns. Another concern, of course, is there's always, you know, as well constructed as these landfills are, you know, there's the liner system and collecting the leachate and all of that. You know, in general, they're very effective at preventing any impact to the groundwater. But there's, you know, like any human design system, they can fail. You know, if we get a hole in the liner at some point, you know, for some reason, you know, that leachate can drain and go, you know, and it'll eventually work its way through even that thick clay layer. It'll work its way through that eventually, and it could impact the groundwater. Generally, those impacts are relatively small and localized, so they're, you know, for modern landfills, it's uncommon for them to have large groundwater contamination issues. What's more likely to leak, you know, the things that I've seen that actually cause groundwater or surface water contamination is usually dealing with the leachate system. You know, if the pipeline that takes the leachate from the landfill to the storage tank leaks. That's things like that. So so that's one of the areas of concern. Now, again, the things that come out of the landfill are, the chemicals that are most common are VOCs, which are volatile organic compounds, and this can includes chlorinated solvents. We see a lot of chlorinated solvents coming out of landfills, and particularly if you go to old ones where there's groundwater contamination because they're not lined facilities, and it's gotten into the groundwater. The main chlorinated solvents are probably the most common thing to see impacting the groundwater. This is things like petrochloroethylene, which is PCE, or trichloroethylene, which is TCE. These are common solvents, or vinyl chloride, compounds like that, or the chlorinated VOCs. And then we also, often see hydrocarbons, which are also VOCs. But they're the things that are more associated with petroleum products, gasoline or diesel fuel or motor oil, things like that. And those are things like benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene. And some of these are very hazardous, very toxic or carcinogenic chemicals. So it's pretty important. Another issue we have often with the leachate is metals. A lot of metals can leach out of the waste. And the things that are often problems are cobalt. We often see lead sometimes from stuff in landfills, or arsenic sometimes. One of the difficulties with metals is that a lot of these metals are also naturally occurring. They're naturally in the soils, and the rock beneath our feet. So groundwater always has some of these metals in it. And sometimes it can be kind of difficult to determine for sure whether or not the metals we're seeing when we're monitoring groundwater near a landfill, are those naturally occurring, or are they a result of some kind of a release from the landfill? So we have, around a landfill, we have groundwater monitoring wells. We have upgradient wells that are used to detect what the concentrations are in the background, that is, the groundwater before it flows under the landfill, that theoretically should be clean. We have information on that. And then we have down gradient wells, any path. There are usually multiple wells down gradient of the landfill and off to the sides to monitor for any potential release or impact to the groundwater from the landfill. And typically on most landfills, the groundwater is sampled from all these wells twice a year, semi-annually. In some states or in some sites, they're actually sampled quarterly. And once in a while, some sites with particularly older sites that have had a long history of monitoring, sometimes they'll be reduced to only annual monitoring. But the groundwater monitoring is a really important part of making sure that we have control of the potential impacts of the landfill. While we're talking about the groundwater pollution and things like that, one important thing I want to talk about is household hazardous chemicals. Now, federal law and state law prohibits a lot of chemicals from going into our landfill. A lot of hazardous chemicals, a lot of our household cleaners are considered hazardous waste, and they are not allowed to be disposed of in the landfill. Things like used paint or used solvents that might be used to clean things, used motor oil, used antifreeze, all those kind of things. Batteries are not allowed to be disposed of in a landfill. Fluorescent light bulbs are not allowed to be disposed in a landfill. All of these things have chemicals in them that are very dangerous, very hazardous. You know, I mean, the switches and thermostats in our houses, if we replace the thermostat, we can't throw that in the trash because most thermostats have mercury in them, you know? And so they're, you know, these are very important things that legally they're not supposed to go into the landfill. But guess what? You know, nobody, you know, it's obvious it would be impossible for the solid waste people to go through every bag of trash that's picked up, you know, to figure out whether there's stuff in it that shouldn't be. And how many people even know that these things are not supposed to be put in their landfill? You know, they're not supposed to be thrown in their trash. And for that matter, even if people know, a lot of people don't care.
Yeah.
It's more convenient to toss that half-used can of paint in their trash can than to take it to the household hazardous waste place. Yeah, yep. And so a lot of this stuff, even though there are regulations saying it's not supposed to go in our landfills, a lot of it ends up in our landfills anyway. And all that stuff, you know, all those chemicals that are in those hazardous chemicals end up in the leachate. And those are where the things, you know, like I said, if it goes to the wastewater treatment plant, the wastewater treatment plant may not be capable of removing them entirely. So this is a really important thing, I think, that we all need to be really aware of when we throw things away. You know, how many people just throw spent batteries into their trash? You know, that's a really dangerous thing to do because those batteries, when they decompose, there's very harsh chemicals that are released. So that's kind of the main groundwater issues and stuff that we deal with the water for landfills. Another issue, of course, is air pollution. You know, landfills, you know, the decomposition of organic materials, is particularly things like food waste in our landfills, really does, you know, those materials decompose and they create methane and carbon dioxide. Those are the primary contaminants. Those are primary components of landfill gas. The gas coming off of a landfill that's generated by the landfill is generally something on the order of 50% methane, you know, maybe 50 to 60% methane, and then maybe 30 to 40% carbon dioxide, and maybe a few percent of some of other chemicals. Very little, you know, it was primarily methane and carbon dioxide. Probably the third largest component, although it's relatively small at most landfills, is hydrogen sulfide. This is the thing that really smells bad, you know, at a landfill is generally hydrogen sulfide. If you go by a landfill and it has a horrible odor, that's probably what you're smelling. It's kind of that rotten egg, rotten food things, and it's very hazardous. It has, you know, if you get too much, hydrogen sulfide can kill you if you breathe it in at too high a concentration. So it can be very dangerous, and that doesn't come from food and things. The primary source of hydrogen sulfide is stuff like sheetrock. Sheetrock, you know, if you have a house or a building demolished and all that sheetrock goes into the landfill, that sheetrock is generally composed mostly of gypsum. And gypsum, when it gets wet, gypsum is a sodium sulfide mineral. And when it gets wet, it decomposes into hydrogen sulfide gas, and it comes off the landfill. And so that's, you know, that can be very hazardous. So another thing that, you know, landfills do have, they're required to have monitoring probes all the way around the landfill to monitor for gases moving through the soils. And they usually monitor primarily for methane. It's only really in recent years, in North Carolina, it's really been in the last year that the state has started to require some landfills, particularly those that take a lot of construction and demolition waste. They're starting to require them to monitor for hydrogen sulfide also. But most landfills monitor for methane. sometimes for methane and for carbon dioxide. And so they monitor any structure, any building, any place where people might go into a enclosed space where these gases can accumulate and be a threat to human health. But they also are required to monitor the soils moving in the gas in the subsurface at the property boundary, so none of those gases should theoretically be migrating off of the landfill property. The reason these are important, methane is a major greenhouse gas, and it's actually, in terms of the amount of reflectivity, the amount of basically the effectiveness as a greenhouse gas that blocks, traps sunlight, traps the heat from the earth in, and contributes to global warming. It's 30 times more powerful than just CO2. So methane, when it goes into the atmosphere, is a major greenhouse gas. And but methane is also explosive. You get more than 5% by volume of methane, and that's the explosive limit. A spark in a 5% methane atmosphere will cause an explosion. And so it's very important to monitor methane in the landfill. And what happens, this is, when a landfill is closed, particularly when, sometimes they'll do partial closures if a landfill, one cell or unit is full, they put a closure over it. When the whole landfill is closed, they do a final cap over the landfill. And that cap is also impermeable barrier. It's sometimes it's made of clay, like the clay in the liner material. It's usually 3 or 4 feet section of clay, and then a layer of topsoil on top of that to support vegetation to grow. Sometimes they use synthetic plastic cap materials to cap the landfill. But the idea is they do not want any more rainwater filtering through the landfill once it's closed. So that cap prevents rainwater from penetrating into the waste, and it runs off of the landfill and is diverted in stormwater ditches to stormwater treatment. Usually have sedimentation ponds and things to treat it as stormwater, but theoretically it's not come in contact with waste, so it should be relatively clean. But once it's closed, they also install vents in the landfill to vent off the gas that's building up. And in a relatively small landfill, particularly a lot of the older landfills, all they do is they stick in a vent, and that methane is just vented off to the atmosphere. In many landfills, you get a little bit bigger, they get a little bit, they're producing more gas. They'll connect up a flare, and they'll burn the gas as it's coming off, which is obviously a lot better. The gas, when it's burned, is largely converted to carbon dioxide, which is still not a good thing for the atmosphere, but it's a whole lot better than methane. So they burn off the methane, and and that helps. Now, ideally, particularly in larger landfills that are producing a large enough volume of gas, they will actually capture that methane and run it through generators to create electricity, or to do other things. I know one landfill that takes all their landfill gas, and they built a kiln for local potters, and they power the kiln with gas from the landfill. And just there's some creative things that people have done to use this gas instead of just letting it vent off to the atmosphere. So, we have, like I said, we have gas to electricity generating plants hooked up to some of these landfills, and that's really obviously the best thing to do. That really captures it and actually puts it to a good use. But that only works when the landfill is closed, when it's reached capacity and they've stopped putting any waste in it, and they can close it and put this cap over it. For an active open landfill, all that working face where they're putting the waste, there's no way to capture the gas. All that gas is just going off into the atmosphere. So that's a major issue, I think, on a lot of these sites. So I'm going to stop there at this point. Is there any questions, any thoughts on some of this?
I'm curious about the clay that's put on the cap.
Mm-hmm.
It is porous.
Yeah,
but is it more effective than putting the plastic, thick-nail plastic?
probably the plastic is actually better. The regulations generally require, there are alternatives allowed in the regulations for how to close a landfill. And one option is to do a pure soil cap. But it does have to be proven, that this soil that is primarily clay, and it has to be tested after they've put it in place to test the permeability of it. And it has to be less than 10 to the negative fifth centimeters per second permeability.
So
same as the bottom, right? And so that's very, you got 2 or 3 feet of clay with that level of permeability. Not much water is going to go through it, especially if it's designed well so that when the water hits that impermeable layer, it runs off and is captured in the stormwater ditches and diverted to a stormwater system. That's the idea. And it's not perfect. It's, like I said, particularly in the very wet climates where there's a lot of rain, some small percentage of that rain is going to permeate all the way through that clay and get into the landfill.
Is there any way to convert CO2, bring in hydrogen, and break the carbon off and make it water?
Yes, but that's a very expensive, difficult process, and I don't think it's ever done for like a landfill scale stuff. But there are, other applications where there are, carbon dioxide scrubbers that do just that. They break up the carbon dioxide into water and carbon, and but it is not an easy or cheap process, so it's not done on any large scale things.
Is that potable water once that happens?
It probably would be if it's done properly.
So we can make water.
Yeah. Again, it's going to be expensive and it's not going to be a large volume.
Right.
So.
A question under the water, with the water pollution, the chlorinated solvents, what type of products that we would have in our house would those come from?
And any paint cleaners, things like your heavy, a lot of your heavy duty cleaners have solvents in them. Grease cutters, usually have solvent based in them. Things like Goof Off or something, like that for removing heavy sticky stuff. That's just pure solvent. That's probably either PCE or TCE almost. It's really, so there are a lot of things. Of course, any kind of paint thinner, even things like acetone or something if you use to clean fingernail polish, and anything like that is is going to usually has chlorinated solvents in them. There are some natural products that that can substitute for that, but most of the normal ones out there. Yeah.
So we all throw our fingernail polish remover bottles in the trash. Should they not go in the trash?
No, they shouldn't. But yeah.
So I have a question. So when the landfill was closed, like I remember years and years ago when Carolina Circle Mall was built, everybody said that was built on top of a dump. And I don't know whether that was true or not, but hypothetically say it's true. Can you come and hypothetically build on top of a dump? And is it safe?
The general answer is no. That's not safe for a number of reasons. There is, the regulations, these landfills, it'll never be allowed to build any kind of buildings on top of them for a number of reasons. One, you do have the methane problem.
Right.
Methane migrating up into that building could be a huge problem.
So
But also, it settles. you know, as the waste decomposes and over the years, the landfill is going to settle, and it's going to, you know, it's going to settle differentially, and a structure, you know, a big structure like a building would not be able to take that kind of settlement, and so the structure
With settling,
wouldn't be
the
safe.
cap would
get-
too,
yeah.
would it
So-
not?
Yeah, the cap, that's one of the requirements for post-closure care, is they have to maintain the cap, and they have to watch for areas of settlement, and any place where they see settlement, you know, particularly if they get a depression that starts holding water on top of the landfill because of settlement, that has to be fixed. It has to be repaired, and you know, they have to keep that cap in good condition for the, you know, for the entire, you know, the regulations require 30 years of post-closure care.
That's my next question.
Right, so for a minimum of 30 years after the landfill closes, they have to maintain the cap, they have to continue pumping out leachate, they have to continue doing all the groundwater and landfill gas monitoring, they have to do all that stuff. Now at the end of 30 years, and this varies from state to state, if a landfill has been closed for 30 years and it has no groundwater contamination problems, there's no methane migration problems been noted, the cap is in good condition and there are no issues there, they can petition to get out of post-closure care and stop monitoring and stop doing a lot of that stuff. In North Carolina, the DEQ here is very, there has never been a landfill let out of post-closure care in North Carolina.
Wow.
And generally, DEQ's attitude is they probably never will be.
That's a good
You know.
Yeah.
So,
So,
what about
but-
Virginia Beach, like that that park there?
Yeah.
So they have all the pipes all around for the methane, but then all your kids are playing right around. I mean, isn't that a hazard?
It could be. You know,
let the
that
kids
particular one is a very old landfill,
Yeah.
and odds are it's probably not generating very much methane anymore, because that landfill must be 50 years old
Yeah, I
or
would guess.
more. So, you know, after a while, you know, the methane production is very high the first, you know, 10, 15 years after the landfill closes, and then it starts to decrease significantly. And theoretically, by the time you get to be 30 years, there's still probably going to be some methane being produced, but it's going to be much, much less than it was when it was first closed. And so probably that landfill probably isn't a big problem there, but it's something that they should definitely be watching out for.
You're
What
about
about
20 minutes.
cows and meth?
I'm sorry?
How does it compare to cows?
Well, cows produce an awful lot of methane. That is true. I don't know, you know, if what the numbers are in terms of, you know, if landfills produce more than cows do. There are a lot more cows than there are landfills. So I don't know, you know, which is more, but they're both significant sources of methane. Yeah.
Now, when you say cows produce methane, is that from the cow patties or?
No, they just flatulate a lot.
How did you get into the specialty, and who is your boss? Do you work for the state, or
No.
who do you work for?
I work for a consulting firm here in Greensboro that specializes in solid waste. It's an environmental engineering and consulting firm that has specialized in solid waste, and particularly landfills, for the last, well, since it was really founded, which was probably, I think, 1991 when the company was founded. The company is based in Richmond, and we have offices, also have offices here in Greensboro and in Charlotte and in Charleston, South Carolina. And like I said, we do, probably 95% of our work has something to do with the solid waste industry. We do a lot of landfills, we do transfer stations, we do gas to energy projects, we do recycling, we build recycling centers, we do a lot of things like that. So, you know, what I do primarily is the environmental consulting side of that business, you know, doing the, you know, all of the groundwater monitoring, the corrective action plans when there are problems, things like that. So.
And you started out in geophysics and then switched to environmental
Yes.
geology, right?
Yeah, yeah. My PhD was in geophysics. My bachelor's degree was in geology. And then my graduate studies were in geophysics, and then I switched. I worked for a few years in the oil industry and absolutely hated it. And so I got out of that and switched to the environmental consulting, almost 25 years ago. And I've been very, very happy ever since. Much better.
I have a question. So when it comes to like cleaners we use in our own home, I think of people who throw away like spray cans of paint.
Yeah.
And they just put it in a dump, and when that gets crushed,
Yeah.
all that's released.
Yep.
Right.
It's maddening to me that people don't think about these things.
I know.
But by using environmentally safe cleaners, not only do we keep things out of the landfill, which is huge,
Yeah.
you're leaving a legacy for your children and your grandchildren and for whoever
Absolutely.
else come along. But
Yeah.
the biggest thing to me is, I love the fact that like our recycling bin is 10 times fuller
Yeah, ours too.
than our waste bin,
Yeah,
and
ours
yet,
too.
I love the fact with the Shackle cleaners, for example, that they last forever. Not only do they last forever, but I have a guarantee that I'm not hurting the environment in any way, shape, or form. And so,
Yeah.
to me, it's like, Lisa and I were talking about this, this morning. You open up your sink, and what do you see in my sink? You see the dishwashing detergent, you see the basic H wipes, you see the basic G wipes, which are, both those wipes are recyclable. The container's recyclable. And I just think, if more people could understand the concept of you're building a mountain of nothing or toxins,
That's right.
as opposed to just the beauty of clean living. I mean, not only for yourself internally, but just
For everyone.
that's very powerful presentation to me, because you look at how long, I mean, like for a very large landfill, how many, like, would it be acres, and how long would it be in existence?
Well,
I mean, I know you said 30 years on average, but
common the landfills, a lot of the ones that we work with, the smallest ones might be 10 acres, 20 acres. There are some landfills that are 200 and 300 acres.
oh my gosh.
Some of them are very large.
Are there examples
so-
in Guilford County?
I'm sorry?
Are there examples in Guilford County we could go see?
Not that you can go see, probably. And of course, the Greensboro, at least not municipal solid waste landfills. The Greensboro White Street landfill they no longer receive any solid waste. It's still open, technically, but they only put like
Yard waste.
and I think they put some sludge from the wastewater treatment plant and some things like that in it. They no longer receive, so it's all goes to a transfer station, and it's transported someplace out of the county. So I'm not sure where it ends up, where it goes from. If there are no, in High Point has an active landfill, but I don't know that they would let people go see it. They do tours, but they
You
may.
said the whites were recyclable. Where do you put them? Do you put them in the green
Recycle
can?
can.
Okay.
All the wipes are recyclable, even the dryer sheets.
Oh, I
Yeah.
did not know that.
I didn't either.
I have not.
Once they
They're
dry out, you
reusable
put them in the
too.
recycle. Anything you use them.
So,
I like the
knowing
recycle.
all this,
I like to reuse
what
it.
do you do in your life so you're not adding?
Well, that is, I think that there are several things that we can do. I just want, I guess before I get into that, there's a couple of things I wanted to touch on here.
Yeah,
We have time. If you look at these afterward, there's some good news here. This shows the total amount of waste generated in the United States per year. And you see it's been steadily increasing, but the last few years it's starting to level off some. But this is even more encouraging. This is the per capita usage of the per capita amount of waste generated in the United States. And we can see for the last, since now 1990, it's been relatively stable. And if we actually look at the last couple of years, the last year that this had data for was 2013, and it was the lowest amount of per capita waste since about 1990, since 1980s. So, you know, we're improving slowly but surely, I think, as a society in terms of trying to reduce the amount of waste that we generate, or at least keep it keep it down.
Is that
And,
difference due to population growth? So a per capita can go down?
Per cap, yeah. This is, yeah, this, you know, this takes into account, of course, the population growth. So this is the amount of waste per person.
Right.
So these numbers are the amount of waste per person per day in the United States. So the average person in 2013 created 4.4 pounds of waste every day.
Wow.
How many?
4.4 pounds of waste every day, the average person. And that's, of course, you know, that includes a lot of things, you know. Now this chart is the one where I think there's some encouragement. This is the amount of recycling, you know, that's being done. So we see, you know, back in the 60s and 70s and 80s, you know, we're talking about 10-15% of the waste was recycled. You know, we get up here and now we're looking at, you know, 34-35% of our waste is recycled. So we've made some huge, you know, strides in improving that situation. I think we still have a long way to go. It would be nice to be aiming for more like, you know, 50%. You know, and perhaps we'll get there someday, but there is good news in that. So I think that really, you know, to get back to your question, the things that we can do, you know, that we do in our household to reduce waste are primarily recycling, you know, making sure that we're not throwing things in the trash that don't need to go in the trash. You know, all of our plastics, all of our paper products, and everything that can be recycled, we make a very strong effort to keep that. I mean, I've had people tease me because, you know, I'll go to our recycle bin and our trash bin, and I'll open up and I see somebody's thrown something in the trash bin that needs to go in there. I stood there going through our trash bin, pulling out plastic bottles and things and putting them in the recycling bin. You know, I mean, it's important to me. And, you know, but also, you know, things we can do to reduce our waste are really important too. So we try to not use things. We have, for instance, you know, we try to not use plastic bags. Plastic bags are a horrible bane to landfills anyway. You go to a landfill, you know, an active landfill, and they usually have fences all around them, and you look and you see plastic bags everywhere because the wind catches them and blows them off the landfill, and it's just a pain for the landfill managers to try to keep that stuff under control. So especially like grocery store bags, you know, so, you know, we take a cloth reusable grocery store bag and use that, and don't use the plastic bags that they give you. Or use paper bags if you need to. Another thing, you know, we use reusable storage containers in our house instead of using, you know, just plastic bags and things.
Glass.
You know, glass containers, yeah.
What about the like the plastic that's supposedly decomposable, corn-based or something?
That's certainly a whole lot better. Probably the worst thing in terms of taking up space in the landfill that's never ever going to go anywhere is styrofoam, polystyrene products. It's almost impossible to recycle them. Although I recently learned that there is a place down in Randleman that recycles styrofoam, and I have to find out more about that. It can be done, but most styrofoam, you know, your typical recycling processes, you can't, they don't recycle styrofoam. So, you know, I really avoid ever buying any styrofoam products. But if you can do the substitutes, you know, if you get peanuts that are biodegradable instead of made out of styrofoam for your packaging materials, if you can find, you know, like say paper plates, these plates and cups that we have over here on our table with food, they are all environmentally friendly. They're recycled. They're totally biodegradable. You know, they're not a
Yep.
problem. So they're, you know, those you can make right choices and things like that. It really helps.
Using cloth napkins, not paper napkins.
That's right. We use cloth napkins all the time. We don't use paper napkins
Right.
normally.
Cotton
Um,
is much easier to replace than trees.
hmm
Cotton.
Yes, cotton is good.
We use
Also,
bamboo.
yeah, bamboo products. You know, we've actually switched, and you know, those things have the advantage of being, you know, not only are you keeping stuff out of the landfill, but you're saving trees by not using paper products.
And if
You
more
know.
people use the bamboo,
Yeah.
you could create even a whole new industry.
Yes, and so, you know, that's one of the big things. So, you know, and we use, of course, we use the Shackley cleaners. You know, the one using one bottle of Basic H with the, you know, as the concentrate keeps how many thousand bottles? I don't remember the number offhand.
5,842, I think.
That sounds right. 5,842 plastic bottles out of our landfill. Those are also plastic bottles that don't have to be manufactured, so it saves the entire process. And that's a huge thing that we can do.
Because there are no chemicals in it either.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, and then also, yeah, those are also very safe for the environment. You know, if those do end up in our landfill leachate, they're going to help clean it. They're not going to help make it worse. You know, so those are very safe for our environment. You know, we can use them, you know, on our, you know, food products and on our garden and everything else. Another thing that we do is compost. You know, composting, you know, if it's significant, about 15% of the waste that goes into landfills is food. You know, the United States is terrible at the amount of wasted food. You know, huge amounts of food are wasted in this country and just thrown away. You know, if we can be better about not wasting food, you know, that really helps a lot. But, you know, when we do have food waste, if we can compost it, you know, we have a composting bin in the back, and we toss all our food scraps in there. You know, that keeps stuff out of the landfill and helps a lot. So I think there are a lot of things like that that we can do.
I was going to say, I remember this was years and years ago when I first started using the detergents. I don't know if you remember this, though. I called the city, the water, this is a little bit different than the landfill, and I said, you know, can you tell me the impact of using environmentally friendly cleaners as far as water goes? And he said, ma'am, the more people we could get to use that, the better off we'd be all the way around.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I just remember that very clearly about, you know,
well, the impact.
He works there.
Yeah, the
Because he knows
impact
the
to our
process of
wastewater treatment system of the cleaning products that we use is incredible.
Yeah.
You know, even if it's, you know, again, that's a different subject than landfills, but you know, we wash our hands with you know, your typical antibacterial soap that you get at the grocery store, and that's going into the sewer, and it's killing the bacteria that are supposed to help clean up the wastewater.
Right.
You know,
So
and
it's just
it
like-
really is detrimental
Yeah.
to the process. And of course, you know, you use cleaners that have harsh chemicals in them, and that goes straight into our wastewater that has to be treated, and they at least try to be removed. And that you know, that is a whole other big issue.
and the pharmaceuticals.
Oh, that's
No
that's one
flesh.
that's very terrible.
And how many chemicals we don't know
That's right.
anything about.
You know, particularly things like the pharmaceuticals, that our wastewater, our drinking water is not even tested for certain pharmaceuticals. You know, we don't know. Generally, most of the pharmaceuticals that end up in our wastewater, you know, they can't be removed by the wastewater treatment plants, and they're not even tested, so we don't even know how much of that stuff is in our drinking water.
Why don't they test it? Who is keeping them from testing?
Money, probably.
Money, yeah, money, and they don't want to know.
Yeah, well,
You know, I think there is probably that.
I read that those things are starting to show up in our blood.
Yeah, I believe it.
Pharmaceutical.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, or in my drink.
I think this whole thing's been fascinating because I want to go. I was telling I want to go to the recycle plant. I'd love to get a group to go to the recycle plant.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by that anyway. But this whole thing, I've always wondered. Like I've been out to the plant, the landfill to take bushes and clippings with falls. But this whole thing, I always wondered about the layering and how it all works and the whole system. And so I did have one quick question. I know we're running out of time. What makes them decide to burn off? Is it the newer facilities, newer landfills that burn off the gases than the older ones?
Well, it generally is the amount of volume.
Amount of
they're
volume.
getting. Yeah. For a small landfill, and particularly for old landfills that, like I said, most of the gas is generated in the first 10, 15
Yeah.
years after a landfill is suited. So you get a 20 or 30-year-old landfill, it's
They don't
probably
need-
not producing enough gas to
That's
burn.
right. You did say that. That's
Yeah, and
fascinating.
economics comes into it too, because even with a relatively newly closed landfill, you know, if it's a small landfill, the volume of gas may not be enough to make it economically feasible to
Right.
turn into to build a generating plant. You know, so it has to be a fairly large landfill in order to justify economically pay
And the
for
birds that fly over the landfills constantly, what are they feeding on?
the trash, largely the trash, and of course, you know, the trash also, you know, attracts insects. So some
Yeah.
of the birds are feeding off the insects. There are rodents and things that are
Yeah.
attracted to the waste. You know, you see a lot of. That's why you see a lot of vultures. You know,
And they get that
turkey
near
buzzards.
system, and then they
Yeah,
period.
you know, out there, and so yeah.
Also,
And
I'm
again-
going to take a minute to say we have a few Facebook viewers, so if you have questions, type your question in to the type box and I will try to read it off for Van. So you can go ahead and type any questions you have now.
Excellent. And here's something, a handout I have for you all. Thank you. This is all stuff that came right off of the City of Greensboro's website about their waste treatment program. And it's really good. It has a lot of tips in here for reducing your waste. It does include buying products in concentrated form so you can cut down on packaging. You know, there's other things like that. There's tips in here for you know, composting and recycling, and on the back is their nice little form that shows what things can be recycled. You know, what needs to go in your recycling bin and what doesn't. And so these are very useful. So I got these as handouts.
Wonderful.
Man, that's a great program.
Yes,
I mean, it's
really
very clear. That's what I love about how you did it.
I have a vacant lot next door, and it must be expensive to remove waste because they drove through my chain past the private property sign and dumped huge piles of lawn trash,
Oh, really?
cut up logs.
Oh man, yeah.
It's actually a felony. The
Yeah.
police are very concerned about that.
Yeah, that's a huge problem.
And-
Illegal dumping is just
I
yeah.
also put it by Westminster Park. They dump it there too.
Well, if you ever see it,
Oh, believe me, we'll be turning it.
Thank you all. Thank you to all you web viewers out there. We
Happy
will be-
Earth Day!
Yeah, happy Earth Day,
Happy Earth
indeed.
Day.